Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, and I'm with my main man, Matt.ehret. He is back again. He is one of the most brilliant geo-strategic minds out there. He is a writer. Matthew is the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot Review, the founder of the Montreal-based Rising Tide Foundation. His works are regularly featured on Strategic Culture, the Duran, Zero Hedge, Fort Russ, Lou Rockwell, Global Research, Dissident Voice, Off Guardian, and Greanville Post. And now he's here on Rogue. So we're happy to have him here. And Matthew is very sharp as to what's going on geopolitically and geostrategically. So welcome back, Matthew. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back on. And also my wife, Cynthia Chung, is the co-founder and spearhead of the Rising Tide Foundation as well. She's another co-author with me at Strategic Culture.
Nice. Excellent, man. Fantastic. Yeah. Matt, lots of things are going on. Lots of things are happening. Where do you want to begin?
Well, like you said, there's so many things evolving on so many fronts, but I think that the issue of the fight for a new system is I think the most important thing that sort of encapsulates everything else. Right now, I've written a few recent articles that I thought maybe we could sort of brush upon, dealing with both. I'm doing a sort of a series. The first one that was published a few days ago was Putin's vision for an anti-fascist open system future and you. Part 2 was something called the Great Reset Fraud. I'll be doing a series of maybe 5 or 6 of these as we proceed. But I think the important positive view of a future, because you know as people come to realize that they've been sitting in a burning building and have been just asleep. The fire is starting to get closer. It's already causing pain. People are gonna freak out even more than they already have. It's gonna take on all sorts of nonlinear effects. And those arsonists who set the building on fire have known that this would be the result. This is what happens every time you look at history. When the system is pushed to a point of breakdown, people will naturally have certain survival instincts. Their minds will move in ways that they didn't before when they were dormant and they thought things were stable and passive. And they will look for solutions. They will be more receptive to outside the box solutions. That's a good thing on one hand. And this is why it's also very important to look at those arsonists who have placed a lot of false solutions in our way for people to jump into as nets. Putin recently called for back in January in his State of the Union address in Russia, he called for the first time for a emergency meeting of the 5 nuclear powers, the 5 veto wielding members of the UN Security Council, calling for essentially a summit to reorganize the system. We have, he's repeated that quite a few times. He restated it again on June 19th before the Victory Day celebration in Russia in an op-ed that he wrote for the National Interest. And it's good because in this op-ed, he's calling out those who are trying to rewrite World War II history to make it sound as though the Russians were negligible in their sacrifice, where in reality they 25 or so million Russians did die to stop the fascist machine. And there's statues not just being taken down in North America. There's also statues that have been taken down in Georgia and Ukraine, celebrating Russian sacrifices, and a lot of these people who are doing the taking down are people associated with the National Endowment of Democracy, George Soros, Open Society Foundations, Victoria Nuland, and there's a lot of Nazi, second, third generation Nazi.
That's before the party members.
Yeah, that's in Ukraine. There's things also in Romania. There's things like this in Poland. Where they really do see World War II as being the real bad guys were the Soviets and not Hitler. So this has been there's been a systemic rewriting of history, and Putin in this article that I encourage people to read. It's a long
article, by the way. It's a great article.
You read it?
Yes.
Oh yeah. And he calls out the Western industrialists and bankers who actually did fund Hitler, the Bank of England. If you don't know about those things, you don't know what's controlling our current world, because they never got punished in Nuremberg. So he calls that out, But more importantly, he makes the point that we do need. We are in one of those moments which do require a reassertion of sovereign nation states to break the power of this financial oligarchy. He doesn't use these words. I'm coloring it with my words. So my first article goes through a little bit of an investigation to how Putin thinks, what is this system on his terms, and also the terms of Xi Jinping and people who are on board with this multipolar alliance in Eurasia, which is very different from the NATO Anglo-American one world government idea for a new system. It's very different.
I love what you just said. Getting into the mind of how Putin thinks and what Xi is thinking and the multipolar world, because a lot of people today throw around that term multipolar world. Some people understand it. They don't fully grasp it. Matthew, can you take us a deep dive into the very minds of the architects of this emerging and current system that is, it's not stopping. It's gaining ground every day, and it's unstoppable, Matthew. It's important that people understand this. Break it down for us, man.
Back in 2014, there is an Arctic conference in Ottawa featuring people from the European Union, UN, US, like all across the technocratic, Anglo-American think tank board. And my colleague had a chance to speak to the former president of Iceland. And he actually was pretty good, but he was on a panel. And she asked about the emerging Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Road of China that had only just been announced the year before. And it was mocked, laughed down as being a fictitious thing. It's a wet dream of the Chinese, basically nobody took it seriously. And here we are 6 years later, and the Belt and Road Initiative, I mean, this is something which has completely transformed the potentials for the world as a whole. It is, like you said, unstoppable. When Xi Jinping announced this, it was designed on a twofold level. One, China had sort of reached a certain boundary condition where they had to export their success, the model that they used to get out of abject poverty in the 70s, which you go back 30, 40 years, it was almost a third world country in China. Yes. And they leaped ahead and did what the Western world did in 350 years. They just compressed that time span into a 30-year sample of time and leapt now to become literally the leaders of maglev rail tech, space tech, computer technology, you name it. They've pioneered now new roads after taking a certain period of decades of copying, learning the techniques that were pioneered in many ways by the West during our more sane periods of the 40s, 50s, 60s. But they've gone to a point now where they're pioneering. They're the ones who are leading the way in a lot of the energy tech and everything else that's out there. And they're exporting it and sharing it with other countries. So it's very different from the IMF or World Bank, which have become sort of, after World War II, these were taken over quickly to become enforcers of a new British Empire using an American brawn to destroy the ambitions of all of the countries who sacrificed in World War II and wanted independence. They were basically told, no, I know, yes, Franklin Roosevelt offered you these promises of development and sovereignty and full spectrum economies, but no, he's dead now. And all of those things that he created, like the World Bank and the IMF, that were going to be conduits for that, no, don't expect that anymore. Because if you look at it, what happened is they were flooded with deep state operatives from the city of London, Wall Street, and they became tools to suppress and keep these nations down so that they got, on the one hand, political independence, but they never got economic independence. And if anything, they were made debt slaves and cash cropping nations where, look at Africa today, right? That's 50 years of IMF World Bank generosity. And it was calculated to get that effect. So China is doing something very different, even though they're being blamed for being like, the Belt and Road Initiative is a new colonial trap, a debt trap. Sure. Very not true at all. Like, they're actually offering investments that are creating engineering cultures, industries in these countries that they're doing business with in exchange for the resources that China needs, obviously for its population growth.
Matt, could you give us an example? And this is important. This is why I love having you on. Can you give us an example for the people of a nation that was impoverished, that China went ahead and helped develop that nation, and what does that look like when China goes ahead and develops a nation? How does that contrast to how it was in the past with European colonial powers literally went in there and strip mined because of the Anglo-American power structure, right? Went in there and strip mined these nations and pillaged them. Let's give a compare and contrast, because the American audience doesn't understand this. Because you literally have beanie hat wearing idiots on YouTube. The other day I was listening to one beanie hat wearing idiot calling China, man, bro, the China is this generation's Nazi Germany. It's what it is. They have no idea what the hell they're talking about. If you could just go ahead, buddy.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many to pick from, but I mean, you could look at Kenya as one example of a nation which was completely, like you said, strip mined with Western corporations, Barrick Gold, other major multinationals that were given sole rights to control the minerals and resources in this very rich country. Right. Never permitted to have any development of engineers, any local industry, nothing. And all of the investments of the West were all, I mean, the vast majority just went into mining and some financial services. Meanwhile, so you compare that to what China's done in the last 6 years in Kenya. They're building vast rail development across the board. They're going into high-speed rail. They have plans now with Russia as well, because Russia and China have they're united in this Belt and Road Initiative, Eurasian Economic Union. So it's one policy. Russia's going in also offering nuclear energy development, which has been something that under the racist policies of the West for the past 60 years, Black Africa was not permitted to have access to nuclear power.
No, they're not.
Africa had access to that because they were apartheid, and that was okay then. So they still have the residues of that. But the Black Africa was told, no, you're naturally, tribal, and so we need appropriate technologies for you that are not going to affect your natural tribal ecosystems like windmills. That's okay, but nuclear, no, that's going to affect you too much. So there was nothing really permitted in terms of advanced tech or industry for Africa or a lot of Asia. But Kenya, like I said, is a wonderful example. And you just look at the blossoming of engineers. The amount of tens of thousands of engineers have been trained by the Chinese to build these things themselves. And so you have the Chinese going in, they have skill sets and they can direct for a certain period a lot of these projects. But the people doing the work, the people being trained that they're mentoring, who are then taking on the managerial positions on the ground in Kenya or in Nigeria or in many other countries, are Africans themselves who will be staying there and teaching and training and continuing to build. So that's something which you just don't see coming out of the philosophical mindset of a colonialist. That is so forbidden. You don't allow your victims to develop those cognitive powers. Never.
Never. Exactly right. When you look at let's say a place like Rwanda, right? Rwanda, which suffered genocide, where 400 or 800,000 people were slaughtered, right? Now you look at Rwanda, my God, it's literally being called the Singapore of Africa. Yeah. What a turnaround! And it's because they had access. They tried to go to the IMF, and the general who was the leader there, I forgot his name, Paul something, right? But They try to go to the IMF, and the IMF says, well, you know what, you can't invest this money in power plants and rail, and you can't invest this in infrastructure. No. Here's some windmills. You can have windmills. But how am I supposed to build an industry? How am I supposed to build factories and a functioning manufacturing base with the great mineral wealth and resources we have? Use solar panels.
Yeah. And that's something they were trying to do back in Desert Tech. So this is an idea that goes back to 2002. They finally realized it was a total failure, but the idea that they're trying to revive it now again under there's this new project called The Sun Never Sets. That's actually the name for the project that is technically being hosted by Modi in India, but it's really not. It's a British operation which professes to revive Desert Tech, which for your viewers who don't know, that was a project that wanted to basically splatter solar panels all across the Sahara Desert through the Middle East, with the logic that these regions get a lot of sun, and then you could convert that into useful, through photovoltaic plates, and then transfer that to Europe, which now needs it because they're deindustrializing and defossilizing, so they need energy somewhere. So they're like, well, let's get it from Africa. Now, this was a complete fraud on every level. Scientifically, that quality of energy would never, like you even said, even if it did stay in Africa and it wasn't exported to Europe, it still wouldn't power industries, and it still wouldn't melt industrial steel. You couldn't, the quality of the energy could maybe like, power your house, some households, but you can't have an industrial society with that. But on another level, it was basically a very evil form of new colonialism that involves keeping these nations underdeveloped, keeping the deserts because wherever you have solar panel farms, it gets really hot, and that extra increase of heat increases the desert growth as well. And then you have storms, right, which then cover every few hours these panels with thick layers of sand, which requires millions of Africans to be solely employed, not as engineers, but as
to clean it.
Yeah, that's no mental power whatsoever, and that's the way the oligarchs like it. That was scrapped finally after it was a huge boondoggle for many years, and now they're trying to revive it again as a counter to the Belt and Road Initiative. So this actually plays into what we've been saying. So the Osawaag plan is the one sun, one world, one grid plan, which ties into the Green New Deal orientation. We designed the Osawaag as a belt from Africa through the Middle East to India, proposes to basically counteract the Belt and Road Initiative of China as far as it's being sold. To give countries a chance to have alternatives, which the evil Chinese won't let them do. Now, I mean, I think that every country who's done a bit of business, as you pointed out, Rwanda, there's Kenya, everybody who's done business knows that this is a trap. But it's still just to show you the desperation and the thinking of the empire right now to try so hard to break this open system, anti-depopulation orientation from China and Russia. So the Belt and Road Initiative is designed to increase nations' capacities of producing, the minds of the people's capacities to think and to have understanding of techniques and knowledge to carry out big projects.
Yeah.
And it's an open system. It's designed to always be something that can be built upon. There's no closed finite boundary condition, and that's very important. Because the empire has always been based and I'm not saying the current one even, empires have always been premised around the idea that we have to control the talking cattle. So we have to impose closed systems that have an absolute finiteness to them by locking people into some configuration of monopolized resources, sets of knowledge bases or techniques that they can't grow out of.
Yeah.
Kind of like an over-domineering mother, you try to keep that.
Yeah, it's all vertically integrated. It's under their control.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just putting us in a brace, in a try to put a cage.
That's the beauty of it. Dude, you hit the nail on the head. It's a very Henry Ford-like approach to development, where Ford wanted workers who are knowledgeable, right? Ford wanted people who wanted to make more money, who wanted to be successful. He wanted intelligent people, and he would train them so they could be more proficient. Thus, he'd have a more productive workforce. And it's from Ford, the Dodge brothers, who went out and created Dodge. That's how the whole entire thing happened. So on and so forth. And Henry wanted competition, and he wanted it because he understood that this is great for all of humanity. And you hit the nail on the head. It's an open system. And that open system is the key. It benefits China, and it benefits Russia, and it benefits Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. It benefits, all the countries that are along the Belt and Road Initiative, the entire Eurasian powers. That if each country is able to train a crop of engineers, a crop of scientists, those who understand systems, those who could innovate, because then they could go ahead and start plugging into this open system. They can start plugging in their innovation, their inventions, their creativity, their resources into this open system, thus bettering the entire region and the world. And this is why Wall Street and the City of London is freaking out, man.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really not that complicated to understand, but it's like also Iran and all of the Middle Eastern countries, the Southwest Asian countries, all the way stretching to Turkey between Europe and the Middle and China. These are countries that have only seen war and regime change manipulations and the Western sponsoring of terrorist groups to keep them at war and divided with each other, and stuck on Saudi oil and really not permitted to honestly develop the way people like Mossadegh if you go back and you look in the 50s and you look at the orientation of people like Mossadegh or Nasser or other people from the Pan-Arab movement, they had a very different idea of modernizing and creating a really a very advanced and very industrial scientific culture in the Arab states. That was not permitted to blossom because of a lot of regime change operations from the CIA, MI6. Now today, you have China going in and offering Iran massive economic deals for development of infrastructure. Syria, there's Syrian reconstruction plans, Iraqi reconstruction plan. I mean, the Iraqi government signed a memorandum of understanding as well with China not that long, September of last year, for an exchange of highly discounted oil from Iraq in exchange for infrastructure development, which is wonderful. Nothing that we've ever seen the U.S. go along with. We've had people now and again who've tried to move in that direction over the decades, but it was never permitted to blossom. Here, it's happening. So if you actually want to have a peace and stability in the region, you need to give people a reason to stop fearing for their lives. Give them some sense of certainty that there's a future, some stability, some confidence. And that involves building infrastructure and training them to do it themselves, which is what China is doing. And I think that, like you said, this is the financial oligarchy has always been afraid of this happening because it's something they don't control, and they're control freaks ultimately.
Right.
Right.
I mean, their scheme is not the propagation, the promotion of wealth globally. Their entire scheme is wealth extraction. That's what it's always been. There's a reason why there's 120 trillion with a T dollars in offshore accounts controlled by the City of London. 120 trillion that we know of. We know of.
Yeah,
it's astronomical. Why would they want to give up control? And this is why early on in the conversation you talked about the system reaching a breaking point. We're at that breaking point. And I'm looking at solutions that are coming from the rest of the world, and like from coming out of China, coming out of Russia, and how it's being vilified. And you talked about Iran, right? You talked about Iran and the massive amounts of infrastructure development that's going on there because of China. And now look at it, Matthew. Every other week, a building, a boat, a car, something's exploding in Iran. Like, it is crazy the level of covert asymmetric pushback that the empire is doing to those that want to break free from its clutches.
Yeah. I mean, I reread Sun Yat-sen's Three Principles of the People that he wrote right before he died. Well, there was a series of lectures, and in it, he's very clear warning about the British. And also, there's another book before that. Where basically he says that you have to, and he's warning his colleagues in China, saying, like, don't trust the British. I know they're offering you a lot of things, but they're like the farmer of the silkworms. They will see you as useful to the degree that they can squeeze silk out of you, but then just like the farmer for silkworms, they will burn you and move on. That's what that's the nature of the British Empire. So don't do it. Don't trust them. He was not listened to very very seriously, unfortunately, but his words, I mean, ring true for all times. It's good business. Like, you compare it to the U.S. State Department representatives who are gloating over the success of their sanctions regime on Iran, and also on Syria, which has caused such
human suffering.
I mean, it's really caused massive death and starvation and pain for the civilians of these countries, and they're the Western technocrats and neocons are gloating over this thing. And then you just compare it to building the types of project that China is doing. It's good common sense business. You're going to create confidence with your partner, and when they're prospering, they will do better trade with you. They will be a reliable partner that doesn't want to kill you. There won't be death to America well, first of all, there won't be any death to China being chanted to the degree that that's happening. There wouldn't be any death to America chants ever happening in any country if America was actually just an honest business partner doing good business with a concern for its own self-interest in an honest way, which is why I think ultimately Trump overall, by speaking out against these forever wars in the Middle East, by tackling the military-industrial complex, I think he's an honest player, and I think China and Russia, when they've invited him to have discussions on, or especially Russia, on a new system with this 5-power alliance thing, I think that they see that Trump is in a fight right now, in a swamp of traitors who are constantly undermine his better impulses, his better instincts, and overall, I think that if left to his own devices regarding the Middle East, he would do the right thing and work with China and build some stuff that's going to have real value. But currently, that's not being permitted. So that's another aspect of the whole story.
Yeah, exactly right. When you're talking about the mindset, getting back to the mindset of Vladimir Putin and Xi, can you describe that for us, man, and dive and take us deeper into what you wrote on your latest pieces?
Okay, all right. Well, here, so closed systems, open systems. I think these concepts are so important, and they're not that complicated, but they're not a lot of people are exposed to them. But a closed system is essentially a Malthusian system. Malthus, for those most people I think have encountered the name. He was a British East India Company economist, a parson, not really a man of God though, who trained all of the economists under Jeremy Bentham and others at the British East India Company in the 1790s to the early 1800s. And he posited a theory that, basically observed empirically that human populations grow geometrically, food grows arithmetically. And so for any government being responsible, it has to take those scientific facts into account and regulate their populations accordingly to prevent overpopulation or the overconsumption of those diminishing returns on resources. That's diminishing returns was a theory that a Malthusian named John Stuart Mill developed upon. And it was all premised around the idea that human beings are kind of like talking cattle. Cattle eat they stay within the confines of their fenced area, and they eat the food that the farmers give them. And they're not going to come up with a new technology for better manure fertilizers or growing better quality wheat or something. Cows don't do that. So the laws of the animal kingdom have certain constraints that are tied to their genetics internally and also their external factors. So a bestial imperialist like a Malthus, like a Bentham, like a Mill, like a Prince Charles, they don't see a difference between human beings and animals. So they want to transpose those limits onto the human society that they want to rule. So this was refuted throughout the 19th century. American leaders like Abraham Lincoln, Henry C. Carey, John Quincy Adams, Garfield, McKinley, a lot of the people who tend to get shot at, as we talked about in my last interview with you.
Sure.
They refuted the foundations of the Malthusian outlook very well by demonstrating, by building things like the Transcontinental Railway and industrial projects, that you could grow your population if you focus on the mind more than the body. So if you give people the opportunities to find their talents by creating a greater division of labor through industrial activity, obviously all of a sudden, when you create new industrial systems that didn't exist in the previous system, people can now discover what they're good at that they didn't even know that they were good at, right? I didn't know I was a good engineer or a train driver. I was just, riding horses. I was the guy like following the horses, being paid to like scoop up their shit. That people, there was thousands of jobs of the poop scoopers. Right. They lost their jobs when you had trains, and when Henry Ford came in and started producing more cars, they lost even more jobs. And, was that a bad thing? Were trains and cars bad? No, they got to discover that they had new talents that involved,
advancing.
Yeah, exactly. So all that to say, the Malthusian system was proven to be a fraud in the 19th century. It was really on its way out. And then a couple of world wars really put the world population through some shock therapy. And a lot of cynicism grew out of that, especially in Europe, but everywhere. And increasingly, the belief that human beings were good, that we're capable of making these nonlinear creative eurekas into new discoveries, and this includes the arts. This was abandoned, and people went into a much more cynical frame of culture. Postmodernism, postmodernist theories, things like the Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie Foundation, the CIA funded things like modern arts, atonal music in the 40s, 50s, 60s, which basically threw all ideas of truth, beauty, goodness in the arts out the window, and it all became based on random expression of ugly emotions on the form of a canvas or sound or whatever, and that became something that increasingly fed back and shaped the population, and the elites themselves went through their own conditioning. The thing about the elites, they always tend to brainwash their own kids.
Sure.
So Neo-Malthusianism became the name of the revival of Malthusianism in the 60s with the death of John F. Kennedy and the creation of Prince Bernhard and Prince Philip, who created the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, the Conservation Trust movements, all of these things that said, it's nice what JFK is trying to do with space tech and nuclear power and all these things, but really we have to know our limits. And so they, by the end of the 60s, with the paradigm shift of 1968, you had a new systemic takeover of governing mechanisms after a lot of assassinations of people like Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy. Charles de Gaulle was ousted in France, who was also against this whole way of thinking. And the idea was, the new order will be based on on the one hand, creating massive piracy over globalized, deregulated free markets to let a bunch of social Darwinists just gobble up the poor over the course of a certain period, a few decades. That's what happened under the deregulation from the early 70s with the floating of the dollar in 71. Right. It became just a free-for-all. The might makes right. And we had, over 40 years, the creation of a bunch of a billionaire class, and nations were essentially stripped and looted that were formerly industrial. So that's one thing that happened. We outsourced our former industries to slave labor countries in Mexico or China that would do the work at low pay, low quality of life that we used to do at a higher pay and a higher quality of life and better tech. They started doing that. That became what filled our dollar stores and our Walmarts, right? Yeah. And we know the dismal outcome of that, but you had an encrusted, new alpha class or wannabe alpha class that grew out of that. We saw a more condensed version of this process occur in Russia with the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s and the creation of a piracy class of oligarchs that were just able to gobble up all of the privatized former state industries, and that's what Putin has been at war with since he got in there in 1999. Right. And a lot of them who have been expelled, who have not chosen to play the new, Putin's game. I mean, Putin has given them basically an option saying, you either play by my rules or we're going to take you down. And those who have avoided either going to jail or other things found their way to London, where you have the Moscow on the Thames in London, which is the Russian oligarchs' mansion section, where they all live under the fearful protection of MI6 because they kind of know that they're also disposable.
Marked. Yep,
they're marked, exactly. It's something more useful dead than alive, as Bertowski got to learn. Litvinenko. Or Skripal. So all that to say, that was the Neo-Malthusian idea. And the idea was always that by unleashing the dogs of total, unabashed privacy, globalization, that at a certain point, when you do that and you deregulate banks and you allow too big to fails, which is always what people like Rothschild were even talking about back in the 60s and 70s. You could see their speeches. Correct. The outcome would be a bubble economy and the inability to physically support the physical population that lives in the world, because everyone's now looking at just the money growth and trying to maximize their profits. And that would pop. Bubbles always pop. The empire that set this operation up knew that was going to happen. They're going back, and I mean, you could read the writings of some of these people like Prince Philip or Maurice Strong or others. They were already gushing in a creepy way about the need to encourage the collapse of industrial civilization to create a new world order, which was always premised around a green technocratic regime.
Right.
of managers at the top, unelected, beyond the influence of elected governing bodies,
Mm-hmm.
would manage the consumption patterns and production patterns of society at a highly reduced number of people permitted to live in that world order. In part, so it's essentially the Brave New World ugly model of, alphas, betas, gammas, mixed in with a little bit of, I think, Orwell's 84 as well. But that was always there. It's not, so the Green New Deal, which is the closed system in the modern expression, that's Malthus's thinking under the current modern world. It took the form of the Green New Deal that first came about in 2009 with Lord Adair, what's his name, Turner? Lord Adair Turner in Britain. He was the guy who ran the all of the regulation for the City of London from 2008 to 2013. Mm-hmm. He's the one that I think was the first that I know of, at least on a high level, who started proposing the Green New Deal for London back in 2008, 2009.
And then all of a sudden, a former bartender from New York City, an idiot of a nitwit, starts espousing it, named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And people are wondering, oh my gosh, she come up with... No, she was given this. She was spoon-fed this. It's ridiculous. Yeah, it started with the City of London. Carbon trading. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, exactly. It's all marketing. They just take these personalities. They like people like Alexandria, she was part of a recruitment campaign looking for talent, somebody who looks a certain way, can sound a certain way with a bit of attitude that can be sold to the population. And then that package is then infused by controllers with policies. And, so that's always the way that they've done this, Look at this might rub some of your viewers maybe the wrong way, but I mean, honestly, look at the British invasion of the 60s, the Beatles and a lot of these bands that were infused into the North American musical complex from Britain, and look at the ties to the British military industrial complex, and look at all of the people writing the music for them. It really was rarely them. That only came later on. But yeah, this was marketing. It wasn't real. There was nothing genuine within it. It was just social engineering. And so, Alexandria is kind of, same thing. But yeah, this goes back beyond her. I think she was probably still in high school when Turner was pushed to London. And the whole idea was, well, the economy is obviously going to melt down. We got the first taste of it with the shock of 2008, 2009, with the meltdown of a part of it that could have taken the whole thing down already, but it was just, and nobody knew. I mean, there was a chance that it could have globally have suffered a chain reaction meltdown. And, we were even told by Congressman Brad Sherman, who stood up in Congress and said, I was told that if I didn't vote for the TARP bailout program to keep the banks afloat, by Paulson and Bush, that there would be tanks on the street under martial law within a week. Mm-hmm. He was serious. And I think that's a genuine fact, that had they not created a bailout system, we would have already been in a dark age. And there would have been no Belt and Road Initiative. There would have been no multipolar alliance at that point to create an alternative resistance. I think that there would have been a lot more reason for despair. So all that to say, the bailout system was created, but Green New Deal. So what were they doing? They were saying, well, we're obviously on the verge of a new Great Depression like 1929. So what got the world out of the Great Depression? Well, that was the New Deal. That's what got America out of it. So we need to use the name, extract any substance from the New Deal, what Roosevelt actually did. We don't want to do those things, but we want to take the name because it sells, and we'll reinfuse it with brainless make-work infrastructure tied to green grids, insulating houses. We can make a few million jobs insulating houses. We could, and we'll tie it into new finance, because who's gonna pay for these green grids that are it's like financial suicide to invest in these things. They're so, you're talking like 30, 40 cents a kilowatt hour for these things. It's like, 1,000 times more than a nuclear power plant or even a coal or natural gas plant. So like, who's going to pay for that? Well, then we have carbon taxes, we have cap and trade, we have these other green bonds. We'll have these things that we'll create now to be the new financial instruments to make it financially incentive to do things that are going to ultimately put new absolute limits and constraints on the population of nations stupid enough to go along with this. And it was always, some of it was accepted in Great Britain in 2009. I mean, people were not, there was still enough sanity that realized that this was dumb and it wasn't going to work. So, you know, there was resistance, and it was resisted in America too. But now that we have COVID, this whole pandemic that's been cooked up. You know, I've got a friend who's buying a shirt that says "I survived COVID-19," and then
oh my god,
right below him it says, "Along with 99.917% of the population."
I love it. I want that shirt.
Yeah, me too.
Oh man, that's awesome.
You know, like now you have things like the global reset program from the World Economic Forum that was just funded and hosted in June.
Yeah,
that's part 2 of my series of articles, which, I mean, it was again a totally creepy summit, and the World Economic Forum also, you know, they used to be just a venue for corporate elites to talk about the world order. And increasingly, they've branched out more philanthropically and also health-wise to fund things like the Event 201 back in October of last year that dealt with the hypothetical situation of a novel coronavirus going haywire globally, and how nations should essentially become subservient to new world governing mechanisms to correct the spread of this new hypothetical pandemic. Which looks a lot like exactly what happened months later.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the World Economic Forum, they had people like Prince Charles, leading figures from the banking sector, the financial industry, City of London, corporate sector, Greenpeace, all speak at this event saying what a great thing COVID-19 actually is. There's a blessing in disguise here, because now the behavioral modification that we've been trying to get for decades and we have not been successful, now we can do it really fast.
Yeah, and we're compliant.
Yeah, people are going along with it.
Yep, they can literally tell us where we can go, where we can not go, where we can eat, where we can't eat, where we can congregate, where we can't congregate. Yeah. They're telling us everything. They've introduced us to a new form of digital learning, which with all these kids staying home from school. They've done. I mean, you're talking about a technocrat and a tyrant's wet dream. Here it is, man.
Yeah,
here it is, and we're so compliant, not even questioning it.
It's really, really creepy. And but yeah, and if you go to their website, this is what they're saying is, you know, we obviously need to deal with this global pandemic, so we're going to have a threefold response mechanism to the pandemic, but we're now going to fold in the Green New Deal, and so we're going to now be able to also take this COVID money, COVID response money, and we'll put it into green grids, green infrastructure, and we'll this is how are going to bring down. We're going to decarbonize the world population by 2050 in order to, as they say, stop
basically knock the West into the Stone Age.
Yeah,
and if they can crack China and Russia without starting a nuclear war and somehow beat the Chinese and the Russians, then the entire world will be back in the Stone Age. I mean, this is exactly what the technocrats wanted, man. I mean, you know, we can't talk about the unipolar world without bumping into the technocrats every single time.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from Henry St. Simon, August Comanti, Thorsten Velbin, Edward Bellamy, the guys who've influenced, what's his name, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the guys like Howard Scott. These are the architects. And they're running off this whole entire model, this new the Green New Deal.
Yeah.
It's incredible to see this, and no one's questioning it, Matthew.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that it's really important. You brought up Zbigniew Brzezinski. I mean, it's really important to look at who trained him, because, you know, him, Sir Bernard,
Howard Scott.
Huh?
Howard Scott.
Howard Scott, and also there was another very influential figure, William Yandell Elliott.
Yes.
Who also trained Sir Henry Kissinger. Notice the of sirs here, right? Also Pierre Elliott Trudeau in Canada. We're all
Pierre Trudeau.
Yeah. Being like the opposite from a neocon type of personality like a Kissinger or a Brzezinski. But no, I mean, they're all playing different sides of the same game during the Cold War. But the strategy under William Yandell Elliott was, you know, he ran the Chatham House wing of Harvard. So he was himself a Rhodes Scholar, who was brought in early on, indoctrinated in Oxford, and reinfused back into the host into the United States in the little after World War I. And he created a little what's called, they call it Chatham House of Harvard, which was the British wing of the Rhodes controlled zone that created a new generation of geopolitician to really advance different forms and flavors of Cecil Rhodes's fantasy for a new global Church of the British Empire and the abolishment of the American Revolution and anything that smelt like the American Revolution anywhere from the world. Because you got to keep in mind, too, the American Revolution was never an American process. It manifested itself with the 13 colonies, but this required the support and collaboration of people of a Republican spirit. And the Republican doesn't mean the party. It means people who believe that law is something which is given authority by the consent of the governed, and that it is designed for the general welfare. That this is not something which is just the will of the stronger to impose on the weaker in a Hobbesian or Nietzschean fantasy land, which is the way the empires always think, going back thousands of years. I say the word Hobbes and Nietzsche now, but I mean, this is not a new idea. They just repackage it. Right. And it required people like Hyder Ali, the Muslim leader of southern India in 1776 all the way through 1790s, and his son, who engaged in a rebellion during the American Revolution in order to suck in a big chunk of the British sea power and army, so that they couldn't fight the Americas. It required France. It required German Republicans who helped train the troops. It required Morocco. The king of Morocco participated in protecting American shipping from Barbary pirates that were being deployed by the British Empire. Catherine the Great of Russia,
Yes.
Was organized by Ben Franklin's networks, because Ben Franklin was made a member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And the League of Armed Neutrality that came out of that Russian initiative, that was, again, Ben Franklin all the way, allowed for shipping and supplies to be maintained to America while they were fighting the British. So it was a global initiative, and people who were thinking on that higher level, like Marquis de Lafayette, Kosciuszko in Poland, the Polish military general who went on to try to lead a revolution in Poland, Ireland even, they all had the idea of first making it successful in the Americas as the first springboard into reproducing that success in getting rid of oligarchical systems forever from the earth.
And we were literally the first shot into this open system.
Yeah, that was the first shot into the open system, exactly. And, Toussaint Louverture, I'm just publishing a piece on Toussaint Louverture and Alexander Hamilton, who helped draft Haiti's constitution. Haiti was the second republic after America. And their story, the story of Toussaint, I don't think has ever properly been told. And again, that was done entirely with the help of certain people like Alexander Hamilton and others, who ensured that the French, Spanish, English empires were not going to get the upper hand with Haiti. So yeah, it was understood much more clearly then than it was today, that it was a global process and it was not localized in a region of the world. And it was designed to be a paradigm shift, into a system where industrial growth, the idea of state credit, national credit tied to the well-being of the people, that was what Alexander Hamilton crafted with his reports on manufacturers and national banking. That was going to be something that was reproduced everywhere around the world as a way to create an advanced quality of thinking and feeling of spirit in the global culture, regardless. I mean, I'm not saying homogenization, but I'm saying that everybody would have the right to access those powers within themselves that empires never permitted. And empires might continue to sort of exist, or imperial impulses, but there wouldn't be the fertile soil for them to sink their teeth into, or their roots into, if you have that rate of constant development happening. That was sabotaged. There's a whole reason for that, but that was sabotaged with the French Revolution. That was, I would say, an early form of color revolution organized by the British Foreign Office, and we've written about that on the Canadian Patriot website. And all of these different things were sabotaged again with Napoleon, who was a Rothschild-funded thing that then created 20 years of just chaos in America, in Europe. And ultimately, restored the monarchies in 1815, and so people forgot what America was all about as an open system paradigm shift. And there were a couple other moments where we had a chance to recapture that lost opportunity, like in 1864 when Lincoln was solidifying his victory over the Confederacy, and there were plans to export that American development model into Russia with the Trans-Siberian Railway, Meiji Japan, France, Germany. Von Bismarck was applying it to the Zollverein to unify Germany the way that the American states unified themselves after the Revolution. That was sort of the same thing. There was a movement in Canada to do it. In South America, Benito Juarez was on that orientation as well. That was sabotaged as well, with a lot of assassinations, a lot of coups, and then a couple of revolutions in Russia and a couple of world wars, all artificially induced by a dying empire, got in the way and overturned the chessboard and disrupted that natural evolutionary development process that humanity was going through.
Wow.
Cecil Rhodes came out of that process, right? Mm-hmm. So this guy is a racist diamond magnate in South Africa running Rhodesia, and he's just the embodiment of what this imperial system is. He just loves the elitism of the whole thing, and he despises colored people and people who are just of a gamma class, in his mind. So he comes out of this thing funded by some Rothschild money, under the influence of people like Lord Ruskin, John Ruskin from the Pre-Raphaelites of Oxford, and he then takes his massive fortune that he got from exploiting Africa, and before he dies, he lays out a series of wills on how his fortune should be allocated to in the service of the empire, the British Empire, that had to readapt and to survive, thrive, and take over in the 20th century. And you could read his seventh will that he publishes. It's available online, and it's very clear what this is, and basically involves creation of a scholarship program called today we call it the Rhodes Scholarship, is what Yandel Elliott was a part of, to increasingly indoctrinate young talent from around the globe in Oxford, retransplant them back in order to advance the subversion of nation states and the bringing about of a new global ideology and global system of control under a technocratic regime. And then that, to make it a little bit more complex or interesting, I don't know, a group called the Fabian Society, which was another think tank, sets up the London School of Economics with a more of a socialistic flavor to it, So there, where the Roundtable group is a little bit more conservative British, like Lord Milner and these guys are more conservative British monetarists and what have you. Then for the people who didn't think that way, a lot of it was directed towards workers and things, unionists and things like that, who were fighting honestly for their rights, but it was used to seduce them by having more of a Marxist flavor. The whole thing was always interconnected, though, interwoven. So people like Lord Halford Mackinder was a Fabian Society member, but Lord Bertrand Russell was a Fabian Society.
H.G. Wells, Bernard Shaw, Virginia Woolf.
Oh, yeah. All these guys were, and they were all eugenicists, like religiously committed to eugenics. And basically,
they founded the London School of Economics.
Exactly. And they worked kind of in a Jesuitical way, sort of taking on the costume of whoever you want to infiltrate, whether it's a left, a right, a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, or whatever it was. You just adapted to whatever your situation was, and you just made it work. And you made things easier for new blood coming in, whether they were Rhodes Scholars, whether they were Fabians, whether they were, another interconnected offshoot. There's a few. You just made things easier for them to climb up the ladders. And the ideology, it was called Permeation Theory. So you just permeate. So in Canada, for example, what was that?
And delayed tactics.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the whole Fabius Maximus, the Roman general that fought Hannibal. That this whole Fabianism is named after. Yeah,
it's like slow attrition. Yeah, you get the enemy just to weaken themselves, and then you just slowly just take over. Exactly. So these guys were always working together, and you saw that. I should wrap my thought up. I just realized we're going through a lot of time.
No, take your time. I love this crap, man. It's awesome, dude. I love it. I'm excited. So keep going. Stand as long as you want, bro. I'm serious.
All right, cool. All right, so like Lord Mackinder, one thing here that I just found out this a while ago. I was reading a little Canada Day article. Just because July 1st, right? It's Canada Day. People paint their faces with maple leaves. And they get drunk every July 1st. And that's the day we celebrate our British North America Act of 1867. That was the day we became a confederation, a dominion under the British Empire, but somehow our own thing somehow. So anyway, so they do this stuff, and it's a weird day for me because I know my history, and it's just weird to watch people. Just to quickly side note, when we had the Prince William do his first visit to Canada, I was there in Ottawa. And they had thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people painting their faces with red and white and stuff. And in honor on Canada Day, in honor of our royal guests, they had the British flag flying on our Parliament building, not the Canadian flag, on Canada Day.
Jeez,
totally weird. Okay, so I was looking a little bit into, because I knew Halford Mackinder came to Canada, but I didn't know that much more than that. So I read a few things, and sure enough, he came to Canada after quitting his post. He had it in his letter of resignation to Beatrice Webb at the London School of Economics, where he was the director until 1908. So he had it in his resignation because he had a new job offer. The job offer was to go to Canada and create a battle plan, a strategy, and coordinate keeping Canada from accepting a North American Zollverein plan. Which was very close to happening, and it was called the. It looked on it from a cynical perspective today. It looked a little bit like NAFTA, but it wasn't NAFTA. It was basically a North American free trade zone that our Prime Minister at the time, Wilfrid Laurier, who was a Lincoln admirer, had spent over 2 decades organizing for. Now the thing then was that this is 1908, 1909. This was the America today that we kind of are uncomfortable with that acts like an empire. It was not the same thing then, right? Yes, you had Teddy Roosevelt. He was a jerk. He abused the Monroe Doctrine, and he was an Anglophile. He loved King Edward VII. So you had traitors in America, yes, but America overall still had a very industrial, open system, anti-imperial impulse back then. So there was an idea of a Zollverein, of a protective tariff outside of the continent to encourage the industrial development of the continent as a whole. Canada only had about 10 million people. Today it's only 30 million. It's not that much more. Very underdeveloped. And so that was a problem. And it was scary because at that time, there was a lot of discussion for building the Bering Strait rail line connecting the transcontinental rail in America through British Columbia, through Alaska, into Vladivostok, and into Russia. Tsar Nicholas II had just funded a feasibility study using American engineers to see how to make this happen. And it was published across the New York Times and everything else. So it was a very real prospect. It had already been discussed as early as Lincoln's victory. And when Russia, just in the wake of the end of the Civil War, Lincoln's allies, like Seward, had initiated the Alaska Purchase with allies in Russia who had saved America during the Civil War, right? That's why that's why Britain and France didn't come in officially as open supporters militarily of the South, because Russia had sent their battle fleets to the Pacific and Atlantic coast as a message to the European imperialists, saying, if you do this, that's war with Russia. So, and that was 1863. That saved America. Mm-hmm. So the purchase of Alaska was directly tied to that, and it was always tied to the idea of extending rail through Russia. And the Russian rail systems were built by American engineers, American economists, allies of Henry C. Carey. And it was the idea of uniting the continents was always there. And as I said, Berlin, Bismarck was a big ally, a staunch supporter of Lincoln, and he was a big enemy. He understood the British Empire and empires in general much better than people realize, and he kept Germany out of a lot of crazy forever wars that they were being sucked into. You could say that his ouster in 1890 was what got Germany, that's what got the ball rolling officially for World War I to happen. He wouldn't have allowed that to happen. All that to say, so Mackinder, right, back to Mackinder. Mackinder comes in, And his job is to configure a battle plan to keep this Zollverein from happening, and specifically to keep Russia and America apart from each other. And Canada had to be, monarchical Canada was a very strategic wedge in between this natural alliance of powers. Yeah. So who funds him when he quits his job at the London School of Economics? It's Lord Milner. Lord Milner was the one who recruited Mackinder. Lord Milner is the guy who runs Cecil Rhodes's roundtable movements and the Rhodes Scholarship Program. And he's the one who pays for his entire trip. And they work together. Then Milner comes to Canada afterwards, and they create a battle plan for doing this. And people who I'll email you my article, which goes through the story, and then goes through the coming decades of Fabian Society, Rhodes Scholar collaboration, especially with a Canadian focus, but it obviously your American audience is going to get a lot out of this, I promise. But you put that in the link, or maybe I don't know how you want to share that. Yeah, all that to say, just a few years later, right before Roosevelt comes in, the Great Depression has already struck, and that was a controlled demolition of the system. They created a bubble in the 1920s. They popped it at a certain point with broker call loans being called in, and they did that because the world previously didn't want to accept the League of Nations, and that was the first New World Order attempt. So the League of Nations was created by the British, by Lord Milner, who ran the Treaty of Versailles. Lord Milner, by that time, had run a coup in Britain, had taken over the British government. They'd ousted Herbert Asquith, the labor leader, and the Roundtable movement was firmly in control by the time 1919 arose. And these Roundtable people, along with John Maynard Keynes, who was a Fabian Society member and a big devout eugenicist, they basically ran the program for the Versailles reparations and the Versailles Peace Treaty, out of which came the League of Nations, which was supposed to be the thing that replaced nation states at that time. It was supposed to happen already in the 1920s.
Right.
The thing that threw a wrench in the gears was that America still had not been cleansed of its nationalistic impulses. And so there was a lot of resistance, even though you had assholes like Woodrow Wilson, who was also a racist, who was also a eugenicist, and who also loved the British, even though he was technically in power, although at that point, I think his mind was pretty much gone. But anyway, even though you had asshole leaders like that in high office, the Congress, the Senate, there's a lot of strong Republican resistance, and it sabotaged the League of Nations. And also you have people in Canada and in Ireland who sabotaged it, and elsewhere. So they needed to learn a lesson. That lesson was the Great Depression. So the shock therapy that was induced on the Western world with the controlled popping of that bubble, with the broker call loans all being called in, on the exact same day, the story, in 1929, that was induced to create a massive bank run and to just do, again, shock therapy, right? Like just make people suffer in trauma for a while so that they will accept what was formerly unacceptable. The thing that the Rhodes Scholars in Canada did at the time, I'm not going to go through, I'll focus on that because that was my point originally with Mackinder and Milner, is that they created the Fabian Society of Canada in 1931 called the League of Social Reconstruction. And this is an interesting thing because this was originally a think tank, and it created a political party right away called the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. Yeah. It was set up by the Canadian Fabian Society. It was set up to be a scientifically managed society under socialistic principles, but basically it was designed to be a eugenics imposing system of governance for the Canadian cultural context. While in Quebec, it's a French part of Canada, it's its own province, they have a different culture, they had a different variety of more Nazi, a stronger, more overt Nazism under Adrien Arcan, who was the Quebec Nazi leader who almost took power here. All being funded by the same people. Keep in mind. Now, the Canadian Fabian Society, here's the interesting thing, right? Its founders were 6 founders. 5 of those founders were all Rhodes Scholars, and one of them was a Fabian, Wordsworth, who became the first head of that party.
Birds of a feather.
Huh?
Birds of a feather.
Birds of a feather. So it's just, again, they'll wear any garb needed to get the overarching mission done. This party, by the way, transformed its name in 1961 to the NDP. So it's the third biggest party in Canada today, called the National Democratic Party. There's a lot of good people in it. I'm not trying to say that just because you're in the party, you're thus this. I'm not saying that. But you got to look at some of this core poison that's there as well. A lot of these figures, people like F.R. Scott, who's the father of Peter Dale Scott, the guy who coined, he's a sort of a Canadian Noam Chomskyite, who coined the term deep state back in 2015. They're just left gatekeepers. Their battle plan, their domain of usefulness for the empire is primarily on the domain of ideas. So they write books, they write revisions of history, they write theories of knowledge that become absorbed into university curricula that end up there. So they're thinking on they're playing a long game, right? This is how the empire thinks. It's not about physical power plays more than, sometimes they do physical power plays, but more often than not, people have to be aware that there's a higher battle of ideas. And these groups, people like F.R. Scott was also the mentor of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, a young Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was then deployed to Harvard to be indoctrinated under the Chatham House of Harvard under Yandell Elliott, along with Kissinger, and then deployed to the London School of Economics, where he was then made, full Fabian and given anyway, whole other story there. We've written about it. Go to our website. But this whole thing is all designed to destroy this thing that America did in 1776 that was not about not wanting to pay taxes or disliking tea or something.
Sure.
There's something so much more profound that you can only get if you are in the habit of reading the original writings of people like Ben Franklin, read Alexander Hamilton, read Thomas Paine, like really sink your teeth into some of these. Cotton Mather, read his works, and John Winthrop. A lot of these things are available on archive.org. But when you start reading the getting to know the minds of the people who made this history, you realize that what you've been told in popular history narratives is completely fallacious. There's something so much deeper going on, and it is very much in alignment when you read the writings of the speeches.
I love it.
Like Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, talking about creativity, talking about man's relationship to nature. Very similar lines of thinking that are feeding into the Belt and Road Initiative. And
Matt, I hope that people are listening to this, folks, because I'll tell you right now, we were the first open volley, the first shot across the bow for the open system. And this is what I'm so thankful that you're on this broadcast right now, because this is what the American public needs to hear. Folks, what the new Silk Road is the continuation of 1776. That's what it is. That's what it is, the continuation of the open system. And the open system has been at war with this top-down, vertically integrated City of London closed system, the system of tyranny, for the last 200 some odd years. And you're seeing, like what Matt detailed for us, he took us through this Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II. Every single time was a chance for this system to spring forth. And now that we're a bunch of hijacked, we're a completely hijacked operation here, right? We're seeing the rudiments. We're seeing the bubbling up, the springs of this open system again erupting on the world stage, and the powers that be that again are trying to quell it. Matt, that is profound, man. That is profound.
It absolutely is. And again, you can only really, it's just our words talking right now, right? But if people take the time, go to TAS, go to the government website, read some of these important speeches, read Putin's article from June 19th, to make it real knowledge in your mind. Because if you're just hearing us talking about this, it's something that isn't real. It's your opinion. You might even have a good opinion, but it's not real knowledge that you can go and really ground it and defend it and teach it. So to take it to that next level, you got to take the extra time avoid Netflix a little bit and instead invest that time every day into reading the original writings of Alexander Hamilton's Report on Manufactures. Read some speeches by Xi Jinping. You can buy them online. Read Putin. Think about it. Read Plato. Like the Platonic dialogues with your wife, with your husband, with your kid, whatever. You like sit down and actually read some of the stuff and talk about it with your friends, with your loved ones, and make that more of what you increasingly feed your soul with and use as entertainment instead of wasting your time. Because now, we are at the end of the system here. The thing that the thing that America that scared the empire, that made this such an important process, is that it was the first time that you had the mind of human beings defined as the source of value in your political economy. You're going to get that if you read Alexander Hamilton. He's very clear that it's the mind's power of creation, which is where value emanates in all of the other systems. Pricing, like think about all of the crap that we're given for pricing theory, risk management theory, like all of these things. Where does value come from? And that people come up with volumes of textbooks after textbook about market theory and monetarism, because it's tied to people's desire to pay, people's desire to avoid pleasure and maximize pain. No, inverse. Avoid pain and maximize pleasure. Or no, those are all mechanisms. But the source of value, the invariant, that's going to be true 10,000, 20,000 years from now, as much as it was true 20,000 years in the past, is that the mind of human beings infuses value into everything that we do. And you can get that if you read, for example, my wife and I right now, we're reading Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe every night. This is one of the most profound works. And Daniel Defoe, and I only was put onto this guy because I read Lincoln's economic advisor, Henry C. Carey, who wrote a book called The Unity of Law, which you can also get on archive.org. It's a great book where he's refuting Malthus, he's refuting Darwin, he's refuting Mill and Bentham. But this guy, and this guy is a player internationally. He's always citing Robinson Crusoe, saying if you want to really understand physical economy, if you want to understand the principles of economics, you got to read Robinson Crusoe, Daniel Defoe. And so he read it. And
oh wow, now you're gonna make me want to pick that book up.
Yeah, it just pulls you right in, and it's really, the story is simple enough, but it's a young guy, not really guided by any principles in life. He's trying to find himself on a taking an adventure. He basically quits his school, his work prospects, jumps on a ship to become a trader at sea, right, to see the world. And he basically gets sucked into slavery. He ends up doing these various little things that are just interesting, kind of surviving, eking by, floating though. He's a floater until one day a ship that he's on crashes at sea off the coast of Brazil somewhere. We don't even know where. And he finds himself on a little island, the sole survivor. And he's there for a very long time. But at a certain point, he goes back to, he finds the next day after he's survived on shore, he sees in the distance, the ship is actually it's stuck in the sand. So if people just stayed on the ship instead of trying to get off the ship, which is what killed them, they would have been okay. But so the ship is now there. And he's like, well, I'm on this island. I got nothing. I'm going to die. Like, there's not even a roof or nothing so he finds a way to start doing voyages to the ship before the ship finally disappears. And he does 13 voyages. One of them he goes on, he's like, what can I find that's useful? He's like, okay, there's some rum, there's some tools, and you're getting into it because he's like, okay, you need that, and he's like just stripping the ship. At a certain point, he finds a chest full of gold and money. He's like, I got so excited when I saw this money, and then I picked it up, and then I realized this is useless to me, and I threw it down. and you're like, yeah, what the fuck are you gonna load up your raft with money and gold for? Yeah. So ultimately, there's a bit of a joke because then afterwards on a further voyage, he's like, yeah, but then I was like, I took the money anyway. but I knew it was useless. I knew it was ridiculous. But yeah, it really shows you that it's his ability to take the time to learn techniques. At a certain point, he's like, I got to learn how to make a pot. I don't know how to make a pot. And he spends months trying to figure out how do you make a pot on an island to put water or fluid in. And he finally figures it out. And he finally has a similar process. I have to make I have to weave a basket to carry some grain in. So all of these things that he takes the time to invest in, that takes a lot of work. it has a payoff, because if he didn't do that at a later stage, he would have died. Every single thing was needed. So he had to use his time well. And the movie The Martian kind of does that today. It's one of the few Hollywood movies I really endorse. It's kind of like a Robinson Crusoe.
The Martian, huh? Interesting. I
Yeah,
got to watch them. You know what? You got to give me your book list, man. I'm going to print it up on here, and so people could, you know, because you got a collection of books back there. I thought I had a pretty nifty bookshelf, but man, you got me smoked.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll make a list. I'll make a list for sure.
Yeah, definitely, man. I'd love to. And The Martian. Okay, I'm writing that down.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, do it. Same thing.
So we got about like 10, 15 minutes left, man. What do you want to touch base on?
I don't know.
Let's get deeper into current events. Let's get a little deeper into what's going on with the multipolar world. What's going on in the U.S. politics, Canadian politics, and how do you see this whole COVID BS playing out? In terms of where we go from here. Where does the world go from here? And what do you see? Because I see, like, I talked to my guy in Hong Kong. He's one of the top gold traders on the planet. He's been on CNBC. He's been on like Bloomberg. I mean, you name it. And he's like, in China and Hong Kong, they quickly got this stuff out of control, and business is picking up. It's he's like, he's never been busier, right? So it seems like they're already firing on as many cylinders as possible, where we're just like a drunken man stumbling through the dark over here in the West.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's definitely a race, like I said, between these two systems, and I think that we know what they want. They've been very clear about what they want to do with this whole COVID pandemic exercise thing that we're living through. I'm quite persuaded. We talked about this a little bit in your last show. I mean, I'm not trying to say that there's no COVID-19, but I'm quite persuaded that they are systemically padding the numbers, as you worded it. And I do think that there are things like, if you actually look at the rate of mortality of this thing, it's really very concentrated into certain types of the population, very, very old people who have a lot of comorbidities, obviously. Otherwise, the survival rate is huge, and it's not that different from the same rates as a flu. I'm totally persuaded that that's the case. And when you look at some of the protocols that they've been using on a lot of the patients, especially the old and sick, have been to ventilate them, to put them on ventilators, which I was just reading an article a little while ago that was going through how 9 out of 10 people being put on ventilators die.
Correct.
I mean, that's like a death sentence now, because, and Kyle Seidel, the Maimonides health doctor from the Maimonides Health Clinic on the front lines in New York, he gave a series of videos that have been shut down periodically on YouTube, where he eloquently went through his experience of dealing with these patients and how their symptoms are much more similar to high altitude sickness.
Yes.
What the problem is not that you don't have enough oxygen. It's that the alveoli in your lungs don't work. So by just giving people, flooding them with oxygen, is just putting pressure on their lungs, causing an acceleration of death, especially when they're out of it. And they're so you have all sorts of ways to artificially enhance the numbers, either by actually causing people to die, or by padding the numbers, or by putting people who are sick into long-term care facilities, which has been happening all over Canada and the US and Europe, which then spreads the disease and causes even more death, or by just labeling people COVID deaths who didn't die of COVID, and were never tested before or after they died, and there's been a lot of that happening. So, this is something I believe is being artificially produced as a social engineering thing to advance, as we saw with the, this great reset idea of trying to force through our throats the Green New Deal program. Now, we're going to get a new system. We will get a new system. I've never been more persuaded. I've believed that for decades.
Yep.
Since 2006 is when I think I finally came to the resolve that the system cannot not collapse, but it can be sustained by certain tricks, which is what we've lived through now for 14 years since that thought, in my mind. Other people have known this way before that, So all that to say, Putin, Xi Jinping, others have known that this new system is going to happen. The question is, who's going to shape the terms of that new operating system? What will shape it? Will it be sovereign nation states in the driver's seat, or will it be these technocratic sociopathic bankers and Malthusians? Which one is it going to be? This is the importance of the call for a 5-power emergency meeting, maybe the first of several that should be happening, with I think a greater focus on the U.S., Russia, China grouping than Britain and France should be there. But I think the bigger players, the most important brokers of this should be those three, in which other countries would be happy to be a part of that. And that would look a lot like the Bretton Woods 1944 process of 2 weeks. There was a conference in New Hampshire around which was arranged the new economic system, which were premised around certain principles of banking that at the time were lessons carried over from the New Deal experience, which was an honest interpretation at the start of it, at least, that you'd have fixed exchange rates, that you couldn't have just massive price variability based on speculative activities. You don't want to have that in your global marketplace where you need certain amounts of stability. You know, if your energy, your food, or your oil or whatever, if those prices are fluctuating too much, then it becomes a geopolitical tool, it becomes a weapon against nations, as we've seen now for 50 years.
Right.
Where you can cripple a country by artificially inducing a collapse of the prices of a nation's currencies, as George Soros has done with many countries who have been defiant against the orders of globalization, or manipulate the price of oil, as we've seen recently, right? And you could really hurt a whole nation and have it bring it to its knees. So you don't want that. You want certain certain things like parity pricing. That was something that was in place under the Bretton Woods years of the 50s, and it started to be taken down in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But parity pricing is a lost art. It used to be common sense that you don't allow, when you look at the price it costs of production of an industrial or agricultural good. The farmer has certain overhead costs. So the industrialist has certain overhead costs to produce a thing. If the price on the markets falls below a certain region or too high, then it destroys the producer. You don't want that either, right? It either makes it too expensive for people to buy it or too cheap that the producer can't afford to pay for his operating costs. You don't want that. So you want parity pricing, which allows for a certain flexibility, but it's not infinite, right? It's not just whatever. And you want it all tied to big projects that are going to infuse real value into your system by constantly changing the contours of the system as a whole. This is why things like Arctic development, the Bering Strait rail tunnel that was talked about in the 40s, that was talked about by Tsar Nicholas II or Lincoln's allies. This is something which Putin has revived in 2011. There's an organization in the U.S. Called the Schiller Institute, which has been fighting for this for decades. I think.
Harley Schlanger is a buddy of ours. He was on here a few hours ago, like 2-3 hours ago. He was on.
Is that so? Okay. Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah, I think that if you listen to Harley's briefings, I listen to these quite often, and they're very good.
Yes.
And that Bering Strait rail tunnel, that is the next phase in the natural evolution of the Belt and Road Initiative that both China and Russia have endorsed. So they want to see us as allies and collaborators. They don't want to see us as enemies. They know that that's both bad for business, but it's also bad for humanity. The idea of space exploration is a big deal as well, and bigger than most people realize because we're cynical. We don't watch movies like The Martian enough. There's not enough of those movies that are out there. Most movies about space are about like us dying in space or fighting evil aliens that want to kill us. There's very, very little about showcasing an optimistic scenario, which again, The Martian with Matt Damon from 2015 does that. And again, you got people watching this should just watch that this week. So it's really exciting though. If you get over this, a lot of the cynical, misanthropic conditioning we've all been subjected to over decades of believing that mankind is causing all the problems of global warming and everything else. If you get over that and really just look at what is space, we're in space, right? We are on the Earth. We're spinning at a fantastic rate of speed right now. We're moving around a sun, and that sun is part of a network of billions of suns in just one galaxy that we go around. It takes, I think, 230 million years for us to do one rotation around the galactic center. And that galaxy is part of a network, a cluster of other galaxies, and they're all interacting with each other. There's a giant ocean of cosmic radiation, of all, nebulae, supernova, all sorts of things. It looks kind of boring from your naked eye. It looks like empty space, but it's really not. It's a dense, saturated environment of electromagnetic activity, and we're moving through it. We are in space right now, and the fact is that asteroids periodically do hit. That's why most species that have existed don't exist. And
correct.
Dinosaurs didn't have NASA. They didn't have the ability to. They had tiny little brains like that. They didn't have an ability to think about these higher processes that human beings appear to be the first species on the earth that has expressed that capability to both reflect upon, understand, and then act upon those higher inevitable processes of destruction that periodically do litter the earth. Ice ages are another one. We're probably dipping into a new ice age. People
we are.
Global warming. Yeah.
The only thing that could save us is the Green New Deal.
Yeah. Accelerate the cold. Yeah, they actually want to make the ice age happen faster, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, none of us will be able to heat our homes. We'll all die.
Yeah, right. That's funny.
Yeah, I'll take my skateboard to work.
Man, yeah. So we've never been one of these things. So these are all things that Russia and China are very committed to space-based processes, lunar mining. Russia and China have signed in September 2018 a collaborative deal on lunar development. China is already very, very clear that it wants to start mining helium-3 on the far side of the moon, as well as set up an observatory on the far side, which is unpolluted by the Earth's electromagnetic activity, and that allows for much greater clarity of deep space viewing. Donald Trump has expressed his intent on advancing the Artemis Accords and the Artemis program to put human beings back on the moon with a permanent base by 2028. He's had several meetings with President Putin on this issue, and China has already expressed an intention to want to get over this. In the Obama era, you had the Wolf Accords that made it illegal for the U.S. space scientists to work with Chinese space scientists in 2011. Now they've disobeyed that. When China landed on the far side of the moon, there was a little bit of sharing of information with U.S. satellites and the Chinese, which already was good. That was a good step. But if you could get nations to commit to things like asteroid defense, like lunar development, resource development there.
Yeah, India getting involved in helium-3 mining. They want to get on board as well. Yeah,
and so all of these things, if that's what's feeding our discussion for a new economic system, that would work. That would definitely be good, and that would infuse how we formulate the new value system that comes out of the ashes of the currently collapsing order, in a way which puts nation states in the driver's seat. It would be good for private business, private companies who would be actually making money for doing things that are also good for humanity. I mean, bonus, best of both worlds. And the oligarchy's ideology of depopulation, limits to resources, all of these things wouldn't find a soil to, again, sink their tentacles into. So we want things like that to happen. I think that's what people should be tuning their minds towards. And like I said, I think that there's a big fight in the upcoming elections. I don't even know if there's going to be elections, frankly. There's so many points of chaos that could disrupt that from happening. So it's a big fight. And if people are in America, they've got a lot of responsibility right now to organize in a very smart way. But the key thing is read and come to understand yourself these processes. Don't take anybody's word for it. Really take the time to treat your mind well, and then teach, and then put it into act accordingly. but really learn. Like, people have to study.
Yep, absolutely correct, man. Absolutely right. And it's a time of great volatility, and I think if people are distracted by useless and brainless entertainment, it doesn't bode well. It's a time to be sharpening our minds, our spirits, and our bodies. So
exactly. Yeah, I just said you're playing right into your enemy's hands, right? Like, that's exactly what they want you to do, and you're making it easy for them when you're wasting your time on senseless, mindless entertainment. Just don't do that. Don't even say. It's not because I'm telling you not to do it. It's just, why would you want to do that at this point in world history when there's so much more that matters? Yeah.
Absolutely right. Matthew, Ehret, thank you so much for being on with us, man. It's always a pleasure. You are truly one of the best minds out there for, especially with the multipolar world, the open system. Folks, once again, we have a chance to be part of an open system, and the powers that be that are centered on the City of London Corporation are once again trying to stop this open system from freeing humanity. Are we going to embrace the future, or are we going to just be relegated to the dustbin of history? It's all up to you. It's all up to us. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, enjoy your weekends. Cheers.